Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about altitude and heat training and the nutrition doing those. My name is Richie. I will guide you a little bit through today's lesson, but I won't be the one talking for most of the lesson because this will be done by real experts. First of all, we have Robert Gorgos here. He is head of nutrition at Bora hansgrohe, a German cycling world tour team. And he's also responsible for the development of several MNSTRY products. Furthermore, we have Dan Lorang, who is head of performance at Bora hansgrohe and probably also very well known because of the coaching of Jan Frodeno, but he's also responsible for several other world-class athletes. Just two quick things from my side. First of all, it would be awesome if everyone can mute themselves, because then we can avoid background noises. And if you guys have any questions during the lesson, feel free to write them down in the comment box, and we will have enough time afterwards to go through them, and hopefully the guys have some good answers. Yeah, that's it from me for now. Guys, the stage is yours, and we will see each other after the lesson.
Thank you very much, Richie. I'm really excited that Dan is again our guest, this time, or a second time in English. We also had the first one in German. We know each other for quite some time, and it's always a pleasure to do like those kind of things together. And we just talked briefly before this now that today is not only about science and the theory behind, but also about the practical implications. Dan will be going to a big altitude camp in a few days, in 10 days, okay, I guess, or 11 days. And I just came back a few weeks ago from, we can talk about it, like preparing the Giro. So in another altitude camp. And I'm pretty sure that not everything is super clear in this topic, and that's also a lot of experience what we had with our athletes in the last few years. And for sure, this is also important to consider it. And it's not only about the science that we know from lots of studies, but also about practice, how we experienced it in the last few years. And for sure, this will also have its part today in the discussion. So thank you, Dan, for being with us, and I will give the stage to you with the first topic, and I'm excited.
Thank you very much, Robert, for the introduction and also for having me here in another webinar for MNSTRY. Today the topic heat and altitude training. Robert said it already before. It should not be just presenting studies, but also presenting real practice. So what we are doing in real life. And also really important is that it's not about to find out what is better, heat or altitude. I think that's really important to understand here. But it's more about to present two methods to enhancing methods to for performance, and looking at some advantages and probably some risks. And before we go a little bit deeper, I think we have to admit that for heat training, there is not so much science at the moment. There are some good studies out there over the last 2, 3, 4 years. But altitude training, for sure, this is a topic what is already there for 30, 40 years or even more. And even there's not all evidence so clear that somebody could say that's the way to do it and not in another way. That's why I think it will be really interesting to hear your questions after our presentation, but let's first start with some theory. So altitude training and heat training. Altitude training can be used for having an adaptation to altitude. And there are two goals. So one goal in altitude can be to get adapted to the altitude, to be ready also to perform in altitude. So it could be that the competition is in altitude. For example, if you think about the big climbs going over 2000 meters, so it could be one goal from altitude training to be prepared for that and to train and to be able to deliver your full performance at altitude conditions. And the other way or the other advantage of altitude training is for sure to enhance performance under normal conditions. So starting from sea level until every kind of altitude levels, so that basically that you can benefit from altitude training in all different training and race situations. And with heat training, it's more or less the same. So you have normally two big topics for heat training. One topic is getting adapted to heat. So when we talk about climate change and always hotter temperatures, for sure it gets a topic for all the sports. But also when you think about, for example, in triathlon at Kona, a really specific example where you have to be ready for these warm conditions, for these really hot, humid conditions. And that is the first thing why you are doing heat training. So to be adapted, to be able to deliver the same performances what you could deliver under normal conditions. We have to admit that it's always just coming to that point. So when we talk about 100% at sea level and 100% under cold or normal conditions, we aim to get probably to 98, 99%. 100% is always hard to achieve in these severe conditions. And then the second point in heat training is that over the last years, science discovered that there is a potential performance benefit also to perform better under normal conditions. So not just under heat conditions, but using heat training to better perform in normal conditions, to optimize your performance in other conditions. One last point from that sheet here is in altitude, there are different methods what you can do. So for example, lift high, train low, or intermittent hypoxic training. So even when we talk about altitude training, there are so much variables in it that you always have to be really precise about what you are talking. And I can just say what we are doing with the professionals at the moment is a lot of living high and then training low to high, let me call it like this. So intensity is generally done down under normal conditions, and easy training under hypoxic conditions, but this will also come later in our presentation. So altitude training, why and when? So a specific method for performance enhancing. What happens in altitude is that basically the oxygen partial pressure is lower than if you are under normal condition, especially at sea level. The adaptations, what we want to have is increasing in blood volume and hemoglobin mass. That is basically the blood adaptation. So when we go to altitude 2-3 weeks, we all do it for performance. So it makes no sense to have all these adaptations, but to perform at the same level or even be weaker after an altitude camp. That's why for sure performance gain, peak performance is always why we try these methods. But we have to look where's the performance coming from. And something what is clear is that in best case scenario, you have a higher hemoglobin mass and a higher blood volume. This comes then with a better endurance and probably also with a higher efficiency, so that you are able to use better the capacity what you have. For example, to be more efficient at a certain amount of your VO2 at certain intensities. This comes with altitude training. Better recovery in stage races is also a consequence out of it. So when you have a better aerobic level, when you have more hemoglobin mass, more red blood cells, when you have a higher blood volume, basically you have the potential to be fitter. And if you are fitter, you can also recover faster. You have more oxygen, what is transported through your body, who can help during the race, but also in the recovery process. Recommendations for altitude training. Also there, there are different ways to do it. Probably you also heard of from guys who go to 3,000 meters and sleep there, go down again. So there are different individual scenarios. But when we look at the big mass of athletes, what they are doing in general, they sleep at 1,800 to 2,400 meters. They are in altitude 3 to 4 weeks. And the basic method is live high, train low. So that is what happens with most of the cyclists at the moment. 3 to 4 weeks is always hard to realize for cyclists because they have a lot of races to do. So you have to find these spaces. That's why it's also just 18 days or 15 days. But we know from studies that, yeah, it would be nice to have 3 weeks, probably even 4 weeks. What then happens more in sports like triathlon, running, where you have not so often competition. So you can make these longer blocks of altitude training. So when you go to altitude camps, how should you approach it? So the first thing is altitude is a different environment for your body. So especially when you are at 2,400 meters, the recovery is not so good. You will feel it immediately. Your heart rate will go up. Probably your heart rate variability will go down. Just taking myself, always when I go to altitude, all my body signs are like if I would be ill. So my heart rate variability is going really down. Heart rate is going completely up. With high performing athletes, it's not the same, but still you have, when athletes reacting really hard on altitude, they have massive changes in this variable. So that's why you have to be careful in the first days to have a good acclimatization. So the better your acclimatization is, the better the first phase of it is, the higher will also be the output, and the lower the risk that altitude training will bring you in an opposite direction, because altitude training means also some risk. I mean that the performance is at the lower level after, or even that you need weeks or months to recover from that one camp. So there you have to be careful. We always give us advice to keep watts and speed away, control your intensity over heart rate, really important, because if you are 2,000 meters, I think it's clear you cannot have the same watts, the same speed if you talk about running than at sea level. So you have to use heart rate, because heart rate, the good thing about it is that the intensity zone stays the same. So if your endurance intensity zone is at 120 to 140 beats per minute, it will also be at altitude at that in that range. That's why heart rate is really good, and it's a good parameter to control. HRV, in my opinion, can help a little bit to understand how your body is reacting, how fast it adapts to these conditions. But also here, I would be careful. A bad HRV does not always mean that altitude is bad for you. I can just share here one thing from the practical side is I like to see from the athletes a lot of variation. So up and down in these parameters. When I have this, my experience shows that athletes have a lot of benefit from altitude. They react on it, the body reacts on it, the body adapts to it. And I have really the baddest experience with athletes where nothing happened, where basically HRV stays the same, heart rate stays the same. And when I mean bad experience, I mean that they basically never felt really well. And also it seems that they get not really a benefit out of it. And when we talk about the length of the altitude camp, 2 to 3 weeks is something what you should take the time to, because the acclimatization phase takes already 5 to 7 days, where we do easy training with probably going up with the volume step by step. And then after you can start to go back to normal, a little bit normaler intensities. And here one thing is, why do we train low? Low means low altitude. The reason for this is that we can keep basically race intensity also quite early. So not at the acclimatization phase, but later in that process, we can even train at race intensities, because we are doing intensity at a lower level and not at high altitude.
Okay, maybe now I take over this one. I can also share a few practical ideas that I had in my few altitude camps that I was part of with the team. So what we really want, and this is kind of a very important goal, and that's why we also really focus on controlling the body weight every day, is that for sure the athletes do not use altitude training for losing weight. It's just the opposite. I mean, they're not gaining weight, but we really focus that they eat enough and that they definitely don't go in an energy like deficiency, and that they in best case keep their body weight the same. So we control it in the weeks before, we control it every day in the camp itself. I think now the riders are so aware of this importance that they do it themselves. Everybody has like a traveling scale, and then if something is really outstanding, like super low or something, or maybe even a lot higher than the day before, maybe because of inflammation or a too high training load, or in case of it's too low, like not eating enough, maybe not drinking enough, then we have to react with the training. So that's very important. And it's super easy. I mean, even if a non-professional wants to do altitude camp, this is the first thing you kind of have to do. Like, just watch your body weight, do it every day, and react accordingly. Like, a training plan is just a plan, but your body is telling you what to do, kind of. And why is it so important? Because for sure energy expenditure is generally higher than at sea level. Your body is, just to say it like in simple words, is just more stressed with the altitude. You also need more fluids. You just need to drink more. Often thirst signs are a little bit increased, but we often see, for example, by measuring urine density, that still this is not enough, and that we have to remind the athletes to really drink in frequent like intervals during the day, really drink well during the training. That's super important, and can also, of course, lead to fluctuations in body weight. What we also see is that in some athletes, the sense of hunger is decreasing. So we kind of make a plan, or not kind of, we make a plan for expected energy expenditure and at rest and during training, and put those two things together and give recommendations for the amount of energy the riders have to take in. And we really focus here on carbohydrates. I mean, this is generally a good idea to focus on carbohydrates when you're really training, but especially in altitude, we really want the athletes to fuel the training really well. We will look at some examples later. And also fuel well before the ride, before the training, in the open window phase, and also in all meals. I often joke a little bit, like with the riders, that all you do in altitude is for sure training, resting, and eating. Like, it's super important to also see the importance of the energy turnover and the energy intake. So we have a good system here to track the energy intake, and as soon as a rider tries to like not follow this, or try to make weight or something, the alarm signs should like ring or so. What we also do is that right after the training, we give a mixture of fast-acting carbohydrates and proteins. I will also give you an example later, but I already said the word, that the open window is also a important topic in altitude. What we also see, that probably because the body has just more stress than under normal conditions, also the immune system can be influenced in a way that the riders are prone to getting sick quickly. So we really want the riders to react to the training and give the body the nutrients it needs right after training. And of course, very, very important in altitude is because of the increase in blood volume and the increase in hemoglobin mass that we want to achieve. The body needs kind of the building block for it, so iron, and without sufficient iron stores, and that's actually a quite simple measure that everyone can do by going to the doctor and measuring ferritin levels, for example, and hemoglobin levels. You can see if an altitude camp makes sense. If the ferritin level is too low, let's say, we want to have a certain number, and under this number, the athlete is kind of not allowed to go in altitude camp. And if this is not the case, like if this is the case that the number is too low, we would not send the athlete in altitude. So there's quite a few topics that are important from the nutrition side, and if all those things are considered, this is our experience from the last years. I would say that, I don't know, Dan, please correct me, but for sure 8 or 9 riders from 10 can benefit from an altitude camp. We have some examples where we have had problems, but in general, especially for preparing a big stage race, altitude training in general works very well.
Yeah, I agree on that. I just want to add, we don't have it on the slides, how you go to altitude. So you should be healthy before you go to altitude. I would always recommend 7 to 10 days where you are really healthy, so not being sick before going to altitude, because these are exactly the examples what Robert mentioned, when we have 1 or 2 who are not reacting on altitude or have even a bad experience. Normally, or in general, there was always something before they went to altitude. So athletes should be healthy before going to altitude. You should already have a certain level of performance. So you should not go to altitude basically when you are in a weak shape. So first of all, just do a base work and then you go to altitude. That's fine. And also the week before going to altitude, you should not be completely exhausted. So you go to altitude, you should be really at a good state, good form, no sickness, good condition, and then altitude can give you the next step. So that is really important. And then we have in most of the cases that you get a benefit. The differences of the benefits are different. So also here, probably a simple example, if you have a hemoglobin, if you have a HB value, for example, or probably hematocrit value, because most of you knows probably that value of, I don't know, 40, for sure there's a bigger potential than if you have already 47. So it's about also, so what we see is when you have low hemoglobin levels, low hematocrit levels, the potential from altitude training, so the performance gain is in general higher than with the other athletes. But that is no science. That is just something what we saw over the last years. And like Robert said, nutrition really important. Iron supplementation. Please don't lose body weight. I was also witnessing myself as a coach athletes who really went down in body weight and who never came back during the season because they had a too high protein turnover. They will really decrease muscle mass. The body starts to eat itself, and that is not really nice because you have no chance. You cannot come back anymore in that season. So really important here. And probably as last point, you see how much care we take as a team about altitude, about coaching the athletes to do the right thing. That's why probably most of you are not high professional athletes. So if you want to do altitude training, please really inform you well, read about it, and if you have the possibility, at least talk to somebody, an expert who has experience with altitude training, just that he or she can give you some recommendation so that you are not doing the same mistakes as a lot of people have already done in the past. So that would be my recommendation. The same after also for heat training. Okay, and then we are already at the second topic, heat training, why and when. Also here, I said already at the beginning, we have these two options: heat training for getting adapted to heat. That is the first thing, or heat training for performance enhancement. And main difference is that you have warmer temperatures than usual during your training. And what is really important here is that you control what you are doing there. So basically, what kind of adaptations are you looking for? You're also looking at an increase in blood plasma volume, an increase in total hemoglobin mass, an improvement in the flow properties of the blood. The sweat rate also gets higher. Also, there are some observations that by doing this, the concentration of your sweat, so the electrolytes that are in your sweat, get less and less. So basically, the body gets used to that is not. So probably you know these pictures. People are completely salty after in hot weather, and with this kind of training, you can basically decrease how much salt your body gets out over the sweat. So also this can be an heat training adaptation. And then also heart rate, and that is basically one big goal of heat training is that you have a lower heart rate at the same given temperature. For example, if you have to perform at 30 degrees, for sure heart rate will first be higher because the cooling process costs energy. For the cooling process, your heart have to work more, and by getting used to that, you are able to work more efficiently in the heat as before. But don't get me wrong, you are not more efficient than ever, but you are working more efficiently in the heat as if you would do no heat training. So what I said also at the beginning, if here is 100%, heat training first helps you to bring your heat performance closer to your optimal level. It's hard to perform better at a higher temperature than at normal conditions. So that's normally never happens, but you can close that difference, you can close that gap by being prepared for the heat. And then the second thing is really using heat training a little bit like altitude training, so as a method to increase performance for under general conditions. And here it's also important that you are controlling what you are doing. And controlling, I mean, when we talk about heat, we have to talk about body temperature, about core temperature, however you want to call it. So, because what happens when you exercising in the heat, or even when you exercise, your body core temperature goes up. And basically, the hotter it's outside, probably the higher it goes at the same amount of intensity. So it's recommended that you control your body temperature so that you really know what are you doing at what temperature. And because to make it easy, what is the body doing? Basically, when the body comes over a critical temperature, the body tries, at least the brain tries everything to shut down the intensity. So the brain has a normal barrier, how it wants to, where it wants to protect the body from too high temperature. Like, for example, if you have fever, we all know how it feels. You feel like you want to stay in bed, or you stay in bed. So the body forced you, the brain forced you, or the brain forced the body to shut down everything so that you stay basically in bed. And that also happens when the body temperature goes up during exercise. And for everybody, this critical limit is different. And there are, like I said, not so many studies, but some studies out there who say that if you train at a core temperature around 38.3, 38.4, 5, 6, somewhere around that area, that this could be a good temperature, a good core temperature to do the heat training. So to prepare your body for higher temperature. You should not train now at 39.5 degrees, or even some fever already. So you should do it carefully and step by step. What means we have here on the slide 10 heat training sessions of 1 hour each. It's a recommendation, so I can tell you a little bit how we are doing it. So normally this block is 2 or 3 weeks, and you have you start probably with 5 sessions where you start with 30 minutes in this condition. In this condition, I always mean with this core temperature. How can you achieve that core temperature? In general, it's easy to do it inside. So you are on the rollers, you are on the treadmill when you're a triathlete. And then we are in general doing the heat training with aerobic intensity. So it's not that we are doing hard intervals at that temperature, but first of all with aerobic intensity, a little bit like you are doing it in altitude. So we start with aerobic intensity, easy work. And to bring your body core temperature then at to 38.3, 38.5, probably you need, or not probably, but you need to wear some more clothing. Probably you saw the funny picture from this painter, the suits. So where basically your body cannot breathe really, so you sweat a lot, and this helps you to bring up body temperature quite fast to that target zone with an easy intensity. And then you start with 30 minutes, so you go up to 45, up to 1 hour. And over that process, over the next weeks, you can then also start to do some intensity there. But that is just the last step. So if you want to make sure to do nothing wrong, I would stay with the aerobic work. There we have really good experience with it, and it works quite well, especially if it is about performing better under normal condition. If you say, okay, I have to perform in Kona, probably then you also have to train heat under race conditions. So what you will find also in the race, but be careful with it, control it. How can you control it? You can have these temperature pills, what you can swallow. There are at the moment at the market this core sensor. So there are not so many possibilities at the moment to train it and to really monitoring it, but it's already better than it was some years ago. And people always ask me, yeah, but what about sauna or what about hot baths? Yes, also this is working. So going into the sauna, taking a hot bath, so that you increase the time in that core temperature zone. But my best experience have really been by exercising in that condition. So not by passive methods, but by really active methods where you spend time in that target zone. And we also have to mention that we had bad examples. So athletes who did it with coaches, so basically with prescribed training, and they came out of that period and they feel like they cannot achieve their peak anymore. They have been tired, so they were really like a little bit like not really bad, but also not really good. And this also took them 3-4 weeks to come out of that status. So I would say it's not without risks. Like I said, the literature is there, but it's quite it's not a lot what is out there, not a lot scientific based. Also here, if you want to start with it, please check what literature gives you, talk to some experts. And we also have to say heat training is nothing really new. Probably you know that in summer you're training outside and you have the feeling, wow, in summer my progresses are always a little bit better than probably in the winter, or the other way around. Athletes who train a lot on the rollers, a lot on the treadmill in the winter, they have the feeling, boy, in the winter my performance is always growing up, and then I even struggle after to continue the build up. So probably you did already some heat training without really knowing that you are doing it. So it's not really new. What is new now is that science went into it and tried to figure out what are the adaptation processes, how should it be done, what is the right amount of it, and how can we individualize it. And I think there's still some work to do.
Yeah, you named it, Dan. So it's very important to have a plan, like in all kinds of aspects when we talk about training and nutrition. And we just briefly talked about just a few minutes before we started the webinar that it's a quite typical scenario that we all know those platforms where you can race against each other in the living room during the winter. And I don't think it's a bad thing. But also here, like controlling what you are doing and having a plan is quite important. If you just do it for fun, for sure, it's a nice thing to do. But if you want to have a successful season and really like go in super high intensities under those let's say, extreme hot conditions by doing races on the rollers, just be aware that this is a really big impact on your metabolism, and this can lead to a quick gain in shape, but can also lead to like a, let's say, burnout, or at least a physical burnout in spring and in summer. So just be aware that heat is a big impact on your system, and that treat it really with care, and yeah, see it kind of like the same, like we just said, for altitude. So it's a big impact and needs to be monitored and planned, and yeah, just have a plan and know what you're doing. Here's a little summary, what we do when we do training camps, especially in altitude, and you could also transfer it to heat training. So like I said in the beginning already, body weight measurements, super simple, but probably the most important. You can measure the density of the urine. You can, if you cannot do this, you can also just watch the color. I mean, it should be dark in the morning, but after this, it should like not be dark anymore. A good sign of your hydration status. Resting heart rate, like Dan already mentioned, it's totally normal that in the beginning it's reacting and your body is adapting, and that it's higher than in the normal conditions. Also talking about the heart rate variability, but at some point it should come back to your normal values. Sleep is super important. I think, Dan, please correct me, but maybe 1-2 nights in the beginning, the sleep can be a problem, but then it should be normal. If you can't sleep for a week or so, then probably the impact is just too big. And this will for sure lead to problems in later, and can lead to, like, I wouldn't call it overtraining, but maybe overtiredness or so later. And it's super important. But like I said, from my experience, 8 or 9 out of 10 athletes handle this super well, have maybe problems in the first 2 nights, and then adapt quickly. Also, the higher your performance level, normally, the better you can adapt to this. And the training monitoring, like Dan already said, use the heart rate monitor, old school, but it's super valid and like a very good tool to measure the intensity, because the higher you train, the lower the power output will be. There's also some numbers you can use in literature, but the heart rate will never lie. Maybe on the 3rd day in the training block, the heart rate is lower anyways because you're more tired. But especially in the first phase, in the adaptation phase, the heart rate monitoring is like very important. And what we also said already, measure your iron levels, your ferritin, like your iron, how you say that in English? Speicher, your iron storage. So the ferritin should have a certain level. It's a little bit also individual from men and women, but it should be at a certain level to make to enable the body to make more blood and to make more hemoglobin. And if this is not the case, altitude training should be put in question. Like Dan already mentioned, training intensity, be super careful, especially in the first week. I think we had some examples also in the team that when the athletes feel really good and in good shape, that they sometimes overdo intensity a little bit. And this can lead to a very high performance for a short time, but then later the athletes feel really exhausted and do not really get the full benefit or the full possible benefit from a altitude training camp. Talking about practice, this is what we do with the team. What I was in Thailand, for example, in March with some of the Giro athletes, and this is what we do. Of course, we give them exact numbers, but this is a good starting point. Some examples you could consider, like for example, for breakfast, you will always have something that is based on carbohydrates, also focusing on the training goals. When you do harder training, maybe in the second or third week of your camp, for sure, it can be, for example, a super simple breakfast with white rice, a banana, a soft-boiled egg, and fresh fruit. When you do like endurance training, maybe it's more of a classical breakfast, like a porridge with an omelette, some nuts, and an avocado, just as a few examples. During training, rather go a little bit higher in carbs than too low. For sure, even for a 2-hour adaptation ride, 40 grams per hour is recommended. And what we really do in altitude, especially when we go down and train at normal altitude, that we try to feed the intensity sessions with the highest possible carbohydrate amount. For most athletes, it's somewhere in between 100 and 120 grams per hour. It's also good opportunity to train the gut and to see how under those more, let's say, extreme conditions, the body reacts, and if the body is able to digest and use those carbohydrates to perform under high loads. So therefore, we really try to go here 100 or 120 grams per hour. What we also do is, because we for sure, this is probably a point where it's more like practical and not really evidence-based, but we really believe that especially in the long training rides, we always tell the athletes, take a protein bar halfway. So we give the athletes also a little bit of protein, especially in those zone 1, zone 2 rides when they go for 5 or 6 hours. Maybe also, especially when they, I give you an example, they start at the altitude, go down to almost sea level, then do a big loop there, and then come back. And the last hour, 1.5, is coming back to altitude again. This is a big stress for your body, and we for sure want to avoid protein catabolism and give enough carbohydrates. That's the most important thing, but also give a little bit of protein. Here's just an example for when you don't have a car following you. You could make a little bit of a thicker drink with fast carb powder, 2-to-1 mixture, and then later dilute it with water. So you have already a huge amount of carbs on board, and then combine that with bars. In this case, for example, also with a protein bar that is high in leucine, amino acid, and a gel, and for sure you can also stop somewhere and get some extra food. Open window phase, I already said it in the beginning. We try here to get at least 30 grams of proteins, and especially 3 grams of leucine, or L-leucine here again, and also include carbohydrates here. And then the rest of the training of the day after the training is more or less filling up with nutrients. Also include some real food, some micronutrients from vegetables, from fruit, from berries, from salads, from stuff like herbs and spices. In my experience, the athletes that we coach there do really well with simple food, but high quality food. This is exactly what we do. For example, for lunch, there's always something like rice with a small amount of protein, let's say 100 grams of fish or meat, and a small salad. And the dinner is more or less the same. And we just try to match the energy expenditure and make sure that they do not go in an energy deficit. And therefore, we sometimes really have to give also bigger snacks that are often based on kefir yogurt with cereal, with some berries, with a spoon of honey. And yeah, it's also a good way to get some probiotics here through those milk produce. So not complicated, but just really have a plan. How big is the energy expenditure? How big is the carbohydrate intake? How can you get the important protein and amino acids in and cover your energy needs? And this is all you need. Don't go in an energy deficit. And then I think altitude training camp can be more or less easily controlled and matched from the nutrition point. In heat, it's a little bit of a different topic because the energy expenditure when you do 1 hour of heat training is not super high. We just discussed it before. Maybe the afterburn effect, I don't know how to say that in a scientific English way, but the energy you burn after the training to recover from it is maybe a little bit higher, but still, yeah, the energy turnover is for sure not increased a lot. So here we have to focus on the water loss, so the hydration. And I give you an example here. You could, for example, use a product that is a little bit higher in electrolytes, especially in sodium, for example, the Power Cup Heat. And if you do, let's say 1 hour and you are already adapted and include some intervals, then for sure 80 grams for this hour is a good idea. And you could easily match this with this product. And again, not hydrating enough is probably here is the first reason to not reach your training targets or goals. Also here in heat training, watch the intensity. Probably also heart rate control is a good way to do it. I can only tell from my own experience that on the rollers, I will never match the same power that I match under normal conditions outside. So I always try to adapt and watch the heart rate, or use a certain factor when doing intervals or so, when already feeling adapted, of somewhere from 5 to 10% less or so. But this is quite individual. Some athletes that do a lot of rollers are maybe better here, but still I think it's important to watch also the heart rate. And the other topics, I mean, is just, I would say, quite comparable to altitude. Also watch the open window, cover the energy needs, but also on the same time, sorry, my daughter in the background, but also on the same time, don't overestimate your energy expenditure, because it's for sure different than in altitude. So as a conclusion for both methods, or both training methods, I think one important point that we didn't cover yet is the supplementation part. So, and this is also something that probably a lot of you don't know yet, that even when doing the heat training, even when you do, let's say, a block of roller training in the winter, or if you do some special heat training in summer, Dan already said it, it can be on the rollers, maybe with a warm jacket, but it could also be outside, dressed a little bit warmer than usually under hot conditions, somewhere in the south, or even when it's a hot phase in Germany, let's say. And also here, the goal is to increase the blood volume and the hemoglobin mass. So also here you need iron. So I think it's a good idea to control when you train seriously, to get your blood checked frequently. And if your iron stores are not high enough, then even heat training is risky and will not have the possible benefits. All other points we covered already. Yeah, have a plan about your energy expenditure and your energy intake, and then you can have all the benefits that are possible. And what I forgot to mention, a good point to start with, especially when you go in a long altitude camp, is iron supplementation of somewhere around 80 or 90 or 100 milligram elemental iron per day. And just make sure that you don't take it with food, but take it apart from food. For example, first thing in the morning and wait a little bit for breakfast, because some typical ingredients of breakfast, like coffee or even whole grains, can decrease the absorption of the iron, and then not all the iron can act properly. So that's quite important. And also start with it a little bit before starting the training camp. Like Dan said, you should be healthy, you should be well rested, you should not be exhausted from a racing block or so in the week before. And then it's also a good starting point to take the iron. That's what we tell our athletes. And then take it through the whole camp, and maybe even a few days if the schedule allows it, and if you feel good and have no side effects from the supplementation, you can even take it a few days after the training block. This is what we normally do. And then more or less, when you do a 2 to 3 week altitude camp, you would take the iron for almost 1 whole month. So this is what is our experience and what worked really well in the past. Sometimes we also give some more of natural antioxidants, but this you can also achieve through a well-balanced diet, and like I mentioned, with real food, berries, vegetables. And the most important supplement in this case is more or less the iron. Okay, Dan, anything you have in mind?
I would just to say to finish it, especially the heat training, probably those of you who are following triathlon a little bit closer, for example, they probably know, okay, Lucy Charles Barclay prepared herself at home for Kona over 6 weeks, but I can also tell you this is something mentally what is not for everybody. So also this has not to be underestimated. So that's why you always also have to calibrate a little bit what level do you have, what are your goals. Please don't lose the fun in what you are doing. And even if there's altitude and there's heat, the most important part is that you have fun at it. And I can tell you these 6 weeks were for sure not easy, especially not for her husband who have her every day at home. So just in the end, everything looks easy, but it's not so easy. And just to finish it.
Yeah, and I would like to add, like, being at altitude is mentally also not so easy. Most altitude camps are in, I wouldn't say weird places, but lonely places. And you're away from family. It's a big sacrifice being away for 3 weeks. Don't have your normal surrounding. But as a team, like with a few athletes, typically we have in between 4 and 8, 9 athletes, and the coach, nutritionist, physiotherapist. You can create a good atmosphere, and then it's bearable, and then it's good. But I just imagine if you had to do it totally alone every day and manage all those parameters around it, it's quite a big task. So as a team, I think it's possible, but alone it's for sure also possible, but it's hard. I have one young athlete now that I coach from the nutrition. He's going in altitude, and I will try to contact him frequently because I know he will suffer in the 2nd and 3rd week when he's alone there.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Before we come to the questions, I should inform you that if you guys want to get some nutrition products before your next training camp, we have a code for you, like with the code CAMP 2024, which is valid until the end of May. You can get 20% off the tasting box, which contains gels, bars, carbohydrate powders, and stuff like That cool. Then, like I said, we come to the first question, and I already saw one which is probably very popular. It comes from Finn Avemba, and he wants to know if it makes sense to combine both methods with each other, or if this is too much stimulus.
Probably I jump in here. So that's a really good question, because a lot of scientists, coaches at the moment take care about it. How to combine it? Should we combine it? Should we even do it at the same time? Especially like you wrote it in your question, that seems to be a good way. So doing one and then doing the other, probably doing first altitude and later doing heat. What in most of the cases also make more sense for cycling, because normally the cycling races, for example, if you prepare the Vuelta or the Tour, normally it will be hot. So probably if you come from altitude where it's not so hot, probably you don't have the right adaptations to heat. So probably you first do altitude, and then you would do heat to keep this, to have a different stimulus, and then going to the Vuelta, for example. So there are some studies about, or one study about when you combine it, what in my opinion is, at the moment still is a danger to combine heat and altitude at the same time. But yes, so there could be a potential benefit to combine both. The question now is, should you do it immediately? Do you need a recovery between this? And there it gets really, really individual. And there's just not enough data to say, yes, for sure, do it. Just come from altitude and start heat. It also depends on how do you come out from altitude camp. For example, we have two situations: coming out from altitude, going to a race. For sure, you are in a different situation than if the coach plans a recovery week after altitude camp. So basically, you are from that altitude camp already really exhausted. So it would make no sense, in my opinion, to do immediately a heat camp. So it's something what can work, yes, and what you can try out individually. Probably also to extend that period of having a higher blood volume, higher blood plasma. So so the answer is yes. It's a good idea to combine it, but there's a big but. How, when, how long? So a lot of questions here, what we cannot answer in general here in a presentation like this. So it's more about individually trying out what can work, and also as really important information is, how does he or she feel coming down? What is the status, the physical status, and then and then planning the next steps.
But for sure, doing altitude and heat at the same time is a risk. It's like the Finn already asked, is a very high stimulus and might be too much. Like,
yeah, exactly.
We have a second question, which was like answered a little bit by you, Dan, already. But maybe we can adjust the question a little bit, because Iris wants to know if heat exposure, for example, sauna can support the heat adaptation. So, and if I can adjust the question a little bit, like, could there be an effect of just going to the sauna and not training in it, and being like having an impact just from going to the sauna without training in there?
Yeah, for sure. So there are also some there's also some evidence that this can work. So basically, going to sauna, taking hot baths, even without exercising. Even I would not really recommend to exercise in the sauna, because there we are at completely different temperatures. What I told you before, when we talk about a good temperature, 38.5, 6 body temperature, for sure you don't need a sauna to produce that. But passively, it can work. It can help. Like I said, I put it even in a protocol on days where we don't do it in the exercise. So then we go into the sauna. Also here, planning it like 2 times 5 minutes, 3 times 5 minutes, 3 times 8 minutes, something like that. So that have a plan. So like Robert said before, there should be a plan behind, and then also talking to the athlete, looking what is the outcome. So to make it short, yes, that has a benefit and is additionally quite well, and only this also can have an impact. So just doing this without exercising in the heat also can have an impact on the performance. But here, but the best is for sure to exercise in it. So not in the sauna, to exercise in the heat, and so to combine it.
Okay, thank you. Next one is from Sandra. She wants to know, maybe this is something for you, Robert, if, yeah, you mentioned the 80 grams of carbohydrates per hour in altitude or heat training. Is the hourly uptake rate limited because of the higher exposure, or is it similar to the lower exposure?
Excellent question. Yes, it is limited. Heat especially is a big factor, and also altitude for carbohydrate absorption. And we talk more about values over 100 grams. And I also said we test those limits when we train low, but in altitude for sure the uptake is decreased, and also heat is a big factor, and this also decreases the carbohydrate absorption. So 80 grams should be possible, I guess, for everyone. And also important, like the carbohydrate absorption is not dependent on body size or gender or so. Like some athletes can just go higher, some can't. It's also a matter of getting used to it. So do it in training frequently, go higher. I mean, some struggle with 70, 80 grams. Others with 120 grams are fine. So get used to it. And for sure, when we talk about an optimal scenario of, let's say, 120 grams per hour under heat and or altitude, it is lowered. By how much? Again, we don't really know. I mean, it can be measured in a lab, but it's quite complicated. But for sure, by let's say 10, 20, 25%. So maybe in the region of 90 grams then. I said 60 to 80 grams in heat training. I guess this should work for most people.
Okay. These question, maybe the question fits these two questions next. One is from Katrin Stücher. She wants to know how you measure or if you measure the energy metabolism of athletes at altitude. And I think a question fitting this one is also from Manuel, because it's also like connected to what kind of data you guys are recording during those training camps. So maybe we can answer the metabolism question first, and afterwards the ferritin and iron markers.
Yeah, to answer it quickly, we cannot measure the energy metabolism, or at least not exactly. What we have in cycling, and this is a big plus, we can measure the energy output with the power meter. We can also see the efficiency in different training zones and get quite good numbers for carbohydrate expenditure through the metabolic profile, through our special software. And we know that the basal metabolic rate is higher in altitude than compared to normal. And we just use a higher effector for the so-called physical activity level under rest. Normally for athletes is around 1.4 or so, and in altitude we use 1.65 to 1.8. And then we have the basal metabolic rate and the energy used in training, and then we get good numbers for the total energy expenditure. And the second topic with the ferritin levels, they should be, sorry, I can only talk for men. Dan, maybe you know the numbers for women as well, but our goal is to be over 100 with the ferritin, and this is the most important thing. The iron level in the blood can fluctuate from day to day, but those iron stores are a good number to start with. And in the past, for example, we had one athlete that was quite lower, and we tried to start the iron supplementations earlier than usual, like earlier than 1 week before the camp. or earlier than 10 days before the camp. And then we could quite quickly, because probably he was in a deficiency and his absorption of iron was super good, we could bring him to almost 100, and then he was allowed to start the camp. Dan, do you have numbers for women as well?
No, basically the same target values is more about how you get there. So how much do you need to get there? So basically how much do they does the body need? And that's really individual. So I think it's always a good reminder for everybody here, if you have the feeling, so if you feel tired and if you have no real explanation, please do these 2 to 3 times during the year a blood check, just to see that everything is fine, especially when you have these high volumes, especially when you go to altitude, because it can always lead in an iron deficit, especially for women. And yeah, I have women athletes who have to take it basically all the time. I have women who change nutrition and can now basically keep it away, can stay away from supplementation, who are able to get it over nutrition, but it's really, really individual. And but always a point to have a look at. And like I said, if you have the opportunity at least 2 times in a year or 3 times to get a blood check, if you train a lot, if you're just training, but if you're doing 4, 5, 6 hours a week, and generally there's not that normally you don't have any kind of deficit. It can happen also, but there you don't need to have regular blood checks. But if you train, I don't know, 12 hours, 15 hours and more for the professional athletes, for sure it's something to keep an eye on.
Okay, maybe 2 more questions. First one is from Jaco, and he wants to know if devices like a MOXIE can be very useful when exercising on altitude. Maybe for those who don't know what a MOXIE is, to say it simple, it's a tool which measures the oxygen availability and usage of your muscles. And yeah, Jaco wants to know if that is something you guys work with in altitude camps.
Yeah, we were using them last year a little bit more. This year it's up to the coaches if somebody wants to use it, because you also need some knowledge behind it. So it's a measuring tool what can give you some additional information, especially about what is the right intensity at a certain altitude. But it also takes time to analyze the data, to see if the data, what you can see, are they really valid. So that's why I would say we are not using this with the whole team, but certain coaches are using it with certain athletes, and it can be a helpful tool. So combining this with the heart rate, with the watts, with lactate, so bringing all these values together is always gives you a better picture. But on the other side is always a lot of work what you have to do, and for sure in professional sports you should have that time. But even a team like we are, at some point you are limited in resources. That's why you have to really be careful that with all the data that out there, you don't forget the most important thing, and that is to talk to your athlete and asking the athlete how do you feel, how are you. So because the data are good, and I also like to work with data, and I always go step by step. So from the basic stuff, what is working probably, to the a little bit more fancy stuff. And MOXIE it's not new; it's already there for some years. And like I said, I have athletes using it in training. And if you are used to work with it, it can give you some additional information. Do you necessarily need it? I would say no, but it can be an additional information.
Then I would say last question for today, maybe a very important one. Mario wants to know how long the effects of an altitude training camp last, and for how many weeks. And maybe I can add a very small question by myself to that. Like, Robert, do you know how long the calorie and carbohydrate intake after such a high volume training block in altitude stays higher than your like normal calorie consumption?
I would say, like, as soon as you return to your normal conditions, it's normal again. So your body reacts like super quickly. and it's a biological system, so it will always adapt as quickly as possible. Maybe to recover from the big impact, 1 or 2 days or so is your metabolism might be a little bit elevated, but I think this is not a lot. So it's not, like I said, you might lose a little bit of body fat because it's a big stress, and yeah, we for sure want to avoid that the athletes lose body mass, like muscle mass. But yeah, in general, I would say 1-2 days maximum, if at all. And the second question for sure is one for Dan.
Yeah, so we know from literature we can. So when we look at the hematological changes, then we can talk about 3 to 4 weeks where you have this. But you also have to say, when you come down from altitude and when you have this higher level of performance, you can also race at a different level, and probably from that you also benefit even a little bit longer. But from the pure hematological values, 3 to 4 weeks. After that, you also see in studies that basically there you have the best performances, and then after it rapidly decreases because just hemoglobin goes down again, and so that's the general space where you have a benefit. But I would say it's always a little bit longer because of that higher quality that you have. And there are also some smaller mechanisms. It's not just about the blood volume, it's also about capillarization, for example, oxygen transport and so on. But it's hard to measure, and where there are not all the fine data, probably these effects are a little bit longer than the 4 weeks.
Okay, I would say that's it for today then. Guys, thank you very much for the nice questions, and especially thank you to Robert and Dan for answering those and for the lesson. I hope to see you all together soon in the next topics. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dan, especially for being with us. And yeah, I think altitude is super interesting. Maybe not doable for everyone, but heat training more or less you can do in your living room. But be careful with the intensity.
Okay, thank you to all the listeners, and thank you, Robert. Thank you, Richie, for the invitation. And yeah, I wish all the best for your season. Like I said, have fun in what you are doing, and then, because this is the same what the professionals also have. They can only be successful if they really love what they are doing. So the same for you, and have a nice evening and a good start into the new week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.